So for those that think that this is a magical command, let's take a look at what actually is going on. Right. So this is just looking in NT's file system namespace for things that have the name PSH or PS host, right? And then you can see the process number. So it's just extracting information from the name of the named pipe. That's essentially what you're doing. When you're starting debugging, the process now has a named pipe, which will allow you to attach to that process. And right, so the code to do this is not difficult. It just takes a look at the file system where the name pipes go. Okay. So now what we have the process ID. Now we look for the process ID. And I'm in a debugger session, exactly as if I had done enter PS session to a remote session. But now what's happening is I've entered an interactive session with the process that contains my host. And we're going to get a list of the run spaces. Who knows what a run space is? Who has heard of a run space? Well, that's pretty good. People wonder what's the difference between a run space and a session. I think the easiest way to say it is that every session has a run space, every run space can have a session, but not all sessions are in the run spaces. I totally screwed that up. Oh. Yeah. Each session can have multiple run spaces, but each run space has to be associated with at most one session, so 0 or 1 sessions. Oddly enough, this was a usability question because Jeffrey picked the name run space because it was a space to run stuff, and we thought it was completely obvious. Why would anybody misunderstand that? And yet when we did usability testing, they're like, what's a run space? And so in the end, we had to introduce this concept of a session because they were used to sessions, and run space was somehow too confusing. So now I have my list of run spaces, and this will list, if you create a run space, they're all registered in the process now. This is new in version 5. So I can see that the remote host is me, and then run space 1, which I should have named, but I didn't. So the tip, if you're using technology, if you're using this sort of approach, name your run spaces so that you can find them and attach to them. So I'm going to connect to the run space 1, which appears not to be in debugging mode. No, it should be in debugging mode. Okay. So if this worked, I would have had an interactive session because my host process is supposed to be suspended in waiting to be stepped or continued. For some reason or other, it's not entering. I blame the build. So I can't show you all the cool stuff, but basically the debugger works within that run space exactly as though you were debugging your own run space from PowerShell. Again, it's a good place to learn the command line options. And you can do this, yes? No, you have to do an enter PS session on the remote machine, and then enter PS host, and then debug run space. So you can, but it's multiple things. And because this is going over name pipe, one of the problems with, like if you're doing 2 network-based PowerShell sessions, the second one can get off the box because of the double hop security thing. Here, because you're going through a named pipe, it doesn't matter. It's just going through a name pipe, right? And in fact, the fact that it goes through a name pipe is new in V5, but the ability to do out-of-process run spaces has been there since version 3. It was introduced with workflow. And so you can create, if you want to have isolation in your PowerShell, you can create, we've had this job thing, right? But the jobs are not interactive. You can create an out-of-process run space and then interact with it like it was a regular run space. And that gives you the ability to have isolation. And you avoid the overhead of having to create a new run space every time. Back to my deck. Okey-dokey. Right. But now we're going to talk about, because although I said, that's a non-interactive application, it really is interactive debugging. I'm going there and I'm asking questions and I'm operating interactively. But what do you really want to do, right? When you have an application in production, you want to find out what the heck's going on. Jobs, fan-out remoting and so forth. You can use some of the built-in features like tracing, which writes to the event log, but that's kind of a pain. The DSC event log is special. We went out of our way to make the DSC event log actually useful. The only thing that goes in the DSC event log are DSC events. And they are structured events so that you can recreate. If you do a start DSC configuration, -v, and you get all that nice stuff, you can recreate that nice stuff from the event log. But a lot of the other ones, like PowerShell has a single event log for all of the instances of PowerShell running, so it's a jumble. So let's go back to our generic interactive host. I said that if the host is running, if I didn't start the host with debug, then I've got a problem because I can't break into it. I'm sure we're going to fix that, but for the time being, I can't do that. So let's see if I can get this to work. We'll start the little program. So here's my little program, my little non-interactive application. Yes? Oh, for heaven's sake. That's my little application, right? So I want to be able to debug this application in production. So what am I going to do? Well, so way back in version 1 of PowerShell, we thought it would be a good idea to have ways of writing standard information, like verbose messages and debugging messages and error messages. And then we kind of forgot about that for a long time. So when I wrote this program yesterday, I decided that we would take advantage of that. So we have the args cracking, right? I'm creating my run space here and loading my profile by default. Yeah, so I said this is a non-interactive program. If it throws an exception, it actually pops up a message box, which is the worst thing in the world for a production system. Oh, why is it hung? Because there's a message box on the screen that doesn't exist. Debug, so this is how you would enable debugging, right? Enable debug, run space debug. That has two effects. One is it turns on the name pipe. Normally, you don't want to have name pipes lying around, so it turns on the name pipe for you. And then it also puts it into a wait. And I'm ignoring that. Because now I'm creating my command, right? But I have all these streams. And where are they going to go, right? There's no console. I can't write them to the console. So we'll do a trick. We'll go forward and then right. So I'll start, I've added event handlers to all of these things. And so what I'm going to do is, every time an event gets written, I've set up the event handlers to enqueue a message on a concurrent queue. So all of the event handlers can do their thing, but because it's a concurrent queue, it's protected, it's safe, you won't have message collisions. And I'm going to put it into my lovely hard-coded log file. And then I'm going to put a few bits of, and then on the other end of the pipe, I'm using the task capability to handle every time something gets written into the queue, every 100 milliseconds it wakes up, checks the queue, and if there's anything there, it writes it to a log file. And then flushes it because you want your log files written immediately. So cool, but what's it going to output, right? Because there's nothing being actually written. All I'm doing is capturing the output. So if we go to our handy dandy ISE, and we look at the function I'm debugging, right? So this is the code I'm debugging. Say I want to figure out how long it takes to render that spiral. So I have a write verbose saying I'm on cycle number blah. Since that has an impact on the compiler, and when we start JITting, that's interesting to know. The new write information feature. This is something that Jeffrey and Lee and I came up with walking back from coffee. We said, well, we have all these streams and people don't really know what to do with them. Debug versus verbose versus which stream do I use to just write generic information into? Oh wait, let's have an information stream. And so now verbose messages are supposed to go to the end user. It's providing the user more information about how the program is running. Information messages are equivalent to the analytic log. They're messages about how the application is performing, but not specifically for debugging. And then debug is the low-level nitty-gritty details. Right. Well, yeah, so write host is definitely not recommended if you're trying, unless you're explicitly doing output for some, like, sorry, can you say that again? Yes. So June was asking if we shouldn't use write host because it pollutes the stream. You shouldn't use it because it can't be redirected. It's just going, it's like writing directly to dev TTY and Unix. Yeah, we introduced the information stream to provide users a mechanism for the thing that they wanted to do most. We saw this with workflow, we saw this with DSE. In DSE, you do a write verbose to log an information message. So it's exactly wrong because it's not really being written to the user. We needed to have this information channel. Of course, nothing uses it yet, but we will use it in the future. Yeah, so here, at the beginning of a cycle, I grab the start time, and now I'm grabbing the end time, and so I can get total milliseconds. But how do I show this stuff? Well, it all gets written into this log file. So, start the program again. Actually, let me delete my log file. Yes, you're still seeing this, good. So I'm going to start my program again. Whee. so you can see all the stuff that's being generated for every cycle. It tells me the duration is about 300 milliseconds. It tells me which color is the next one to be written. And the nice thing is that you can instrument your code with all of this stuff, and it doesn't impact how your code runs. So when you're trying to debug in the field, you just have this information. If I turn on tracing, I can get tracing going to it. So for building a hosted application, this gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you debug it. And the interesting thing is that when I was writing, this spiral program is really old. I wrote it for my first version of my book. And I was doing this yesterday, and I ran it in this debugger, and I was looking at the message, and I went, there's a bug in this thing. I just got rid of a bug that had been there for like 8 years by looking at the traces. So that was surprisingly pleasant. I'll put this code somewhere, probably on GitHub. It's the beginning of what I think of as kind of a small service host for microservices architecture. Has anybody used Fancy or Flancy? Nancy or Flancy? Yeah. Nancy is a C# based cross-platform, lightweight microservices host. And there's a lot of scenarios where you want to be able to use PowerShell in that way. So you could have, my goal is that you can write a pure PowerShell service, basically, that you can debug properly. And I could write this stuff to the event stream, but as I said earlier, getting stuff out of the event stream is just incredibly awkward. It was designed to be very, very fast to write and less so to read. For a lot of cases, a simple log file works best. And at the end of it, we get, right, so this is a basic model. What's missing? There are a number of things that are missing. One of the things that I ran into is if there was a bug in the code, PowerShell is running pretty fast, and so you end up with gigabytes of log files very quickly. So having some kind of squelch on the debug stream would be important. Having the ability to put in guards and filters, so trigger an event on a specific log message being written. I think that you can create a very flexible execution environment using this technique that is also fully debuggable, maybe more so than the interactive debugging. Yay. So that's basically all I wanted to cover. There's a wide variety of debugging techniques in PowerShell. There's tracing in the event log, there's non-interactive debugging, there's interactive debugging, now we have this ability to connect to a process and do debugging within that process. It has a few limitations currently that I'm sure we will fix. So we have like an incredibly rich set of tools for debugging your scripts. If you have suggestions for more tools, please let us know. Does anyone have any questions? No one. Yes. So if anybody actually has a question.
That's a problem. Well, 1, 2, 3. That's a problem with conferences where we're talking about very specific things like PowerShell and then debugging. That means that the technicians fall asleep.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah. I had somebody describe our jobs once as being both complicated and boring. So if no one has questions, then Claire says, bye-bye. Thanks for fixing my fleas.
Bruce? Bruce, we did have questions. It just took me a while to get the microphone to the person.
Oh, yeah, I have my glasses off, so I can't see what's going on. Actually, that was really stupid of me. I was like, anybody got any questions? I can't see anybody. How useful is that?
Well, great glasses. Well, hi.
Yeah.
Well, if I got you right in the end, what you're doing with your logging was just grabbing the output streams and put it into a log file.
Yep.
Could you show that code again? that piece of
yeah.
code doing this this output grabbing.
Yeah, so these are the various, so each of these,
Screen, yeah.
thank you. There needs to be like an official screen manager position here, because like, this build is not cutting it. So yeah, so here's this does the writing into the queue. And then the task code. Yeah, so here's my log writer. Let me get rid of that window, and that window, and that window, and that window. Right?
Okay, so question is, how much overhead would you produce? You could do this into a module and load this module into my script, and I have a pretty perfect logging, I guess.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. Can you repeat?
I could get this function and put it into my own module and load this module into all my scripts and would have a pretty nice file logging just using write verbose, write information, write debug messages.
Well, you could hook all of the pipes from the existing host, but they already have events associated with them. So for example, if you're in the PowerShell console host, all of these events are already bound to a particular thing which is writing to the screen. This is more aimed at hosting an instance. So if you're doing concurrent run spaces, for example, you could use this technique to do logging for those concurrent run spaces. But it's really aimed at newly hosted instances of PowerShell. It doesn't work. We could add it to our console host and our ISE, and based on my experience yesterday, it sounds like a really good idea. So it's something we should discuss. But this particular code, it's just a very simple host that you can use to run scripts. And it's a Windows process, so you don't get the stupid console flashing, and it doesn't block PowerShell if you launch it from the command line. It's the moral equivalent of TK's wish.
Any more questions? Wait a minute. I think the idea is... Peter, wait a minute. You need a microphone, otherwise we can record it.
I like to say something to logging with native PowerShell things. I think the idea is to have a catch-all streams function, to write all streams to a file or something else. And you can do this with redirection. With PowerShell 3 has offered redirection for all streams. And so you can put it in a script block, and so you have catch all streams to a file or something else, to a database or something else, the messages produced.
I have a session on Friday about advanced logging using Log4net, and I use actually proxy commands to the write verbose on this kind of write to the streams, and then I use Log4net to log them all. So then pretty doing the same on most of the things that I probably need to rewrite now because I learned a lot of things. But the idea is roughly the same when you just catch it.
Yeah, actually, proxies is one I didn't hit, because proxies is a super, super cool way of debugging, because you completely encapsulate your command. You can see all the parameters that go in, you can see everything comes out. It's really kind of amazing. It's used in Pester for mocking, but you could use it anywhere. If you have a tricky problem, you're not sure why a command that you don't own is doing something weird, put a proxy around it, and then see what's happening. It's like, I love the flexibility of PowerShell.
Just for the thing you want, there is already a module that intercepts all the host streams, the data streams, and you can redirect them to a file. So just have a look, and otherwise come, and I have the model with me, and I'm rewriting it to do some more functions if you want.
I've used write debug and write verbose quite a lot of times, but it has a huge performance impact, because even if you switch off the debug and verbose logging, it takes between 10 and 30 milliseconds to get executed, even if it is not going to do anything. Do we have any solution for that?
There isn't, but so one of the really bad problems with all of our write mechanisms is that if you're trying to do anything more than a simple string, that gets evaluated regardless of whether it's going to be written out or not. And so write debug, it passes, it actually calls write debug, and then write debug looks at the setting and says, oh, I'm not going to write this out. There needs to be a better way to handle that. We've actually, interestingly, in the parser, which had a similar problem, what we do now is we pass delegates in the parser. I think that we need to modify write host and not write host, but like write debug to take a script block and not have that evaluated unless it's going to do something, and see what that does to the performance. I don't know how screwy that will be to people's heads. The stuff in the parser is a little weird until you understand why. But using deferred evaluation should certainly improve the performance on that. Yes? Pardon? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, you mean going through the interface?
Yeah. So one thing, our performance on launching commands still sucks. So that's another advantage of using of classes. The performance with methods is way faster than functions. When Jason did all of his optimization, the last thing that we haven't optimized is the pipeline itself, which seems a little funny, but it's an extremely complex beast. Doing method functions or methods is much easier. So as soon as you have any command in your script, you're going to take a performance hit. It's quite amazing if you take like write host and replace it with console.outline, how much faster your script runs, and if that's the only one that's in there. So that's something that we really need to fix in future. We weren't super concerned about performance, we were concerned about human performance rather than computer performance. Now that we are a programming language, we need to be much more concerned about program performance rather than programmer. And I think I'm not sure if that's the next thing on Jason's list or not, but it should be an interesting task. The call site caching that is used in the DLR should work really, really well in the pipeline as well. But again, if you want fast code, use classes.
Okay, Bruce, thank you very much. That's exactly how we wanted it. Q&A, first an applause.